Thank you so very much for having me, and thank you for staying for this afternoon session. I know what a slog it can be, so we'll keep to time, but I am very excited to share with you some things about Christian Aid, and then we're going to take a wee break, and Morella and I are going to come and share some of our experiences and findings from our trip to Jamaica, working with the Church's Reparations Action Forum in Jamaica. It was an extraordinary learning experience, and we have met some incredible colleagues that have, I know, changed my outlook forever. But I wanted to start with Christian Aid, with not the how of Christian Aid. So I'll talk about that, and I'll keep it succinct. But it's really important to start with the why. So I'm going to ask you to join me in a quick reflection that for me unpacks the why of Christian Aid, why we do what we do, and why it's so vital that we do it in partnership. We are your international development charity, and we would not exist without our sponsoring denominations. So thank you. But I would ask you or invite you to call to mind one person that you love. Close your eyes and imagine the shape of their eyes, the curve of their smile, the sound of their laughter. Call to mind the way they smell, the way they feel. And maybe that look they give you that says, you know, I've had just about enough. And if you can hold that face, that feeling, that love, then consider this. 100 trillion cells, 7 million years of evolution, 40 weeks of gestation, years of love and lessons and laughter, tears no doubt too, have gone into that one person you brought to mind who holds your heart. That is a wonder. And now consider this. Our planet home holds almost 8 billion souls, every single one, a unique, one-off, never to be repeated ever again creation. The creative imagination of the divine is reflected in every face. The Spirit of God is in every first and last and in between breath. We are almost 8 billion. And behind every number is somebody's name. And for every statistic, there's a story and a dream and a purpose. That is the why of Christian Aid. The creative spark of the divine is in every single human being. And all of us are called to share a fragile, beautiful, interrelated, finite planet. How we do that together, how we look after each other, how we push back against systemic injustice that keeps some people poor, is the why of Christian Aid. And I thank you for being on the journey with us for 80 years. It'll be 80 years this year. Let's see if I can move it. So our roots. Christian Aid began 80 years ago in the wake of World War II as a response to the refugee crisis. And in fact, the person who began that movement was Douglas Lister, who was a Church of Scotland minister, who was a chaplain to the forces. So it began very much as an organic movement of church communities. And 80 years on, we have evolved, and we work in 29 countries in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, and in South America. We work in partnership always. One of the myths I really love to bust is that there are the donors here and the recipients, a word I absolutely detest, there. That is not what we do. We work in those countries, and the people we work with are on the ground with lived experience. They know best how to respond, and we work alongside them. So all of our teams are local, and all of our partners are local and known. The money goes directly, and the aid goes directly to those places and those partners. And we work with 41 sponsoring denominations in the UK. We're moving intentionally from being a UK-based charity that works in 29 countries to an organization, global, that works in 29 countries, and we have a base sometimes in the UK. So we're trying intentionally to move those parameters out, and I find that really exciting. There is a definite decolonization agenda in Christian aid. Let go of the power, give it back to who it belongs to. And that's an ongoing agenda item and priority for us. Christian Aid Scotland, I have to say you punch well above your weight. For 8% of the population in Scotland, we raise over 12% of the funds for Christian aid in the UK. And we thank you for that generosity. I think it is because we're able to work very closely with you, and our small country works to our advantage. We know each other. We're able to work. And so one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is, as these presbyteries restructure and things change and Christian aid evolves, how do we be a gift to you and to each other? How can we best resource you and work together to co-deliver on our shared global justice agenda? We work in 3 different ways, and I wanted to quickly talk about that because there's been a significant shift in how we have to respond in Christian aid because of the landscape of the world we're living in. First, we deliver immediate humanitarian aid. And over the last little while, I had a look back. We've been in Afghanistan, we're in Burundi, we've been in Cyclone Idai, we've been in India for the COVID epidemic, and we are in the Middle East in Gaza, and that is a very fraught, fragile, difficult place to get into. And if we did not have local partners, we couldn't begin to respond. Immediate humanitarian aid, what is needed right there on the spot, and again, working with local partners means that we can get right there. One of the other things we do is we source locally. There's a myth, and we channel generosity in our immediate response as human beings is to be generous and to give what we have. Sometimes that can be quite counterproductive. And so we source as much as possible locally. It stimulates the economy. It means that our carbon footprint is smaller. It's respectful, and it gives people agency. So that's how we work with immediate humanitarian aid. The reason I wanted to focus on this for a moment is we try to have a balance between immediate humanitarian aid and sustainable development projects that lift communities out of poverty. We have had to shift our focus over the last few years to have more of an emphasis on humanitarian aid because of climate chaos, because of what that is doing to our communities. On top of COVID, on top of oppression and war, we have really seen an increase in emergency and needing to do that. However, we do still do really good, solid, sustainable work on development projects. Microfinance, gender empowerment, and governance are the 3 that we really work, and also on renewable sources of energy and helping people with food insecurity in that space. And again, to bust the myth, the hard work is happening on the ground. in those communities. They're the ones making the changes. And finally, campaigning and advocacy. Poverty is political, it's structural. The only way that we are ever going to do anything other than tinker around the edges is to change those systems. And so we use campaign and advocacy along with you, and you're the drivers, to change people's minds, to change policies. And we work in those countries with our local partners to do that. I wanted to show you before we move on to a really quick look ahead, because that's where I think the excitement starts. But this is a small, short video that for me summed up why we're doing what we're doing as well, and why we're making the changes we're making. And I'm hoping I can make it work.
It's the little things that make us human. And where an unjust world divides us, we'll always be together, because hope unites us. It drives us, with local partners, to tackle the root causes of extreme poverty and give everyone a chance to thrive in peace and freedom. Christian Aid, united by hope.
So, moving forward, I've been asked to take on a new role since my sabbatical when I got to serve as moderator. So I was the head of the team in Scotland. I am now the UK, and it makes me giggle to say it out loud, so I have to get my face straight. I am the UK and Global Churches Ambassador for Christian Aid, and one of the things they're asking me to do is to work with the Church of Scotland and the new presbyteries to figure out together how we can best be a gift to the church. What changes do we need to make from our perspective, from your perspective, to be much more of an engagement tool for you? So making sure that that partnership is strong. How can we help you engage in social justice? How can we resource? What would you need? So some of the resources that we do have, we have the Prophetic Activist Scheme. That's for young people. It helps train people to be activists, to work in their own communities, to look. There's our Global Neighbors, which is a primary school resource that began with the Church of England schools, and we have moved it into Scotland and worked within the framework of the Scottish Government's initiatives to make sure it resonates in Scotland and is appropriate for our school system. And so that's being rolled out during the year. We have resources on the web, and again, those are there for anyone, and I've got all sorts of goodies for folks to take home. But what we would really love is for you to engage with us and say, well, actually, that's all well and good, that's really helpful, but we could really use this. So that's where I'm coming to you today to ask those questions. The other part of my role is to strengthen global faith partnerships. The power of faith communities is extraordinary. I'll go back to Sierra Leone and the Ebola epidemic. If we had not been able to work with local ministers and imams, it would have been disastrous. Even more disastrous. It was horrific. But they were able, in a way we couldn't, to say to people, we're going to have to change some of the ways that we do things naturally. In a respectful way, you cannot sit with your sick. You cannot bathe your dead. We could not say that. But religious leaders who were trusted in that space could, and they could sensitively and pastorally help people through that trauma. And that's just a tiny example of the power of our faith partnerships. But to be able to strengthen those partnerships and learn from each other and be led by our global faith partners is a gift. past that one. So I've done the Scotland pilot. I'm ahead of myself. And the last thing we're doing is writing specific resources for the 80th anniversary. But what I'm hoping to be able to do is listen to presbyteries and listen to church partners so that what we offer is a more sustainable, more all the time, always on worship resource. Over the year that I was moderator, every single place that I visited that had just a fire in its belly for social justice, it was embedded in everything they did. It was in their worshiping life. It was not a bolt-on. So how do we help? How do we resource? How do we inspire and encourage that kind of holistic approach where social justice is a gospel mandate and it isn't just a bolt-on? And all the places that we visited that had just a fire in their belly, you could feel it the minute you walked in the building. You know, I can't say, and then this is a big one. And this leads us on to what Morella and I are going to be talking about later. We have a very big decolonization priority in Christian aid. We're working on our shape and presence. Where do we need to be there physically, and where do we actually need to get out of the way and cede the space and resource and do things differently? So we're doing that work. The word privilege, for me, has a double edge, because very often, if you are privileged, you have access to power that doesn't belong to you. So how do we give it back? How do we say, actually, this is not ours to have? That's your power, and we have to let it go. So that is one of the big priorities in Christian aid, to move into that type of space. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Christian aid, but I also wanted to tap into your wisdom and insights. So have a couple of questions, and wanted just to have you break into wee groups and then feedback. But what do you value currently in your partnerships with Christian aid? And if you don't have a partnership with Christian aid, that's okay. We can start from there. And then what global justice resources or forms of engagement could Christian aid offer that would help, that would be a gift, a resource, bring us all closer together? Because, as I said before, we are your international development charity. We would not exist without our work with denominations. And the Church of Scotland is one of our major, major partners. So how can we better serve you? So happy to answer any questions if there are any. I was also asked to mention a specific piece of work that we do, and it's called In Their Lifetime. And if you want to learn more about it, I'm happy to talk about it. But it is a major donor fund. And what it does is it takes projects that are risky, that governments are probably not going to give you funding for. But if they work, they are transformational. If they don't, then we take what we've learned and adapt. The leverage and scale of those projects is extraordinary. It can be quite huge. So if you wanted to hear more about In Their Lifetime, I'm happy to talk about that. All of our information is on the website. You can also call our office in Edinburgh, and we cannot wait to get your call. Cannot wait to get your call. So any questions, and then I'm going to ask you if I can tap your brains for a few minutes.
Sorry, Sally, I can't stand up. I'm really interested in your work with international partners on empowering women. If you look at what's happening in so many Middle Eastern countries where women, like Afghanistan, where they had been empowered and now they're back down, what can we do as a church to help Christian Aid empower women globally?
That is a great question. There are 3 cross-cutting issues that every project that we enter into has to fit with this. One is gender empowerment, because the face of poverty is a woman's face. You know, if you look proportionately, women are the ones who suffer most and who take on most of the burden. When we realize that in natural disasters, women are 3 times more likely to die in a natural disaster because of the cultural norms set for them. This is your role. You look after the children, you look after the old. You don't have access to education, basic things like learning to swim. 3 times more likely not to make it in a natural disaster. What we do is women's empowerment groups, education, microfinance. So we get into communities and work locally in education and then those empowerment groups. I remember going to Malawi and visited a women's empowerment group, and it was the 5th year of the project. And so I was going to visit them as the project, from a Christian aid perspective, was finishing and moving on. And I said, in a very ignorant, naive way, I said, how do you feel about the project closing or finishing? And the woman who was leading the group at that point looked and she just said, Sally, it's not ending, it's just beginning. That's empowerment. That's empowerment. We also work with men's groups, young people's groups, women's groups. If they need to be separate in order to get the real discussion going, then we do that, and then they come together. And it's all about that mutual respect and shifting the balance. Thanks.
Thanks, Sally. I don't know if folk here will know that Douglas Lister retired to Inverurie and was a member of Gordon Presbytery. I don't think I ever knew that he was instrumental in founding Christian Aid, and I'm looking at my Inverurie colleagues here and say I don't know if maybe there's something that can be done on the back of that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And it was a very brave thing because he was told no at first. He's told no at first, and he went through to the church communities and made it happen.
Hi, Sally. I really I love what you're saying and how you're saying it. You said something that's has really caught me. Privilege. And oftentimes it's used pejoratively, but you said it often means having power that doesn't belong to you, and how do you give it back? So I'm just wondering, how do you unpack understanding what power that you have doesn't belong to you, and who does it belong to? How does that process?
I can give you an example that might help. And I think we're going to hit this big time when Morella and I are talking, because of some of the default ways of approaching things that smack right back to going back to kind of the way that we always do things, and we don't realize what we're saying. I think I'm trying to think of a good space. Our approach to international development is one thing we're changing. There used to be almost a we know how to fix it. And we'll come and fix it for you, which is disabling, disrespectful, and disempowering. It also keeps everything going exactly the same way. A more empowering approach is that partnership approach that says, you have the lived experience, you have the cultural insight, this is your place. What needs to happen? And it starts from there. Rather than, we know what we're going to do. You know, I have to admit, I've been on some of the visits that I've been, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, but I remember in Malawi seeing several things that just appalled me. Piles of our clothes on the side of the road because we give it away to all those needy people and pollute their country with it. Piles piles of them on the side of the road, everywhere. That's an example. Another example were water towers, businesses, schools that we generously decided they needed. So we built them, and then we left, and nobody wanted them or knew what to do with them. They didn't own them. It's about empowering there and saying, this is yours, and we need to get our hands off. It's also about ceding the space. Rather than me telling their story for them, getting out of the way and saying, you need to listen to this person. The Poverty Truth Commission here in Scotland is one of those extraordinary places where people get out of the way and say, this is a person who can teach you something, and you need to listen. So that's a really important thing. We did that at COP26. We brought delegates from our Global South partnerships. We invited the First Minister to sit and talk to them or to hear from them, and we can't take credit for it, but that was the year that the Scottish Government put money in the Loss and Damage Fund, and it was the very first country in the world to ever do it.
Sally, two things you said there that I think are interlinked. One is that poverty is a political choice, and the other is decolonisation, because colonisation was a political choice, and colonisation lies so much at the heart of poverty around the world. So I wonder if you'd like to say a bit more about what you mean by decolonisation.
What we mean by decolonization is decisions being made on other people's behalf here, beginning from a default position that the developed world is us, and that we have this incredible wisdom to impart. Colonization also means extraction. It is about what we can get from there. And it is not about how we can invest in each other. And when we talk about Jamaica and our trip to Jamaica in a minute, I think some of the things that the examples that just jumped out were quite extraordinary and telling. But colonization is about extracting what we can get from somebody else and abusing that power to do it. And sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. Trade linked with aid, that was a government policy, that's colonization. We will give you the money, but here's what we want from you in return, and there is no choice there. It's being done to you, not with you. Thanks. If we got time, I don't want to take over too much time. If we could have, 10 minutes? If we could have 10 minutes where you get in groups of 3 or 4 and just answer those questions. And what I would really, I'm greedy, I'm a greedy human, I really am. But if you could record that somehow so that I can take it with me, because I genuinely want to take this back. That's what this is all about, is taking this back so that we can serve the presbyteries better. And what we really want to be able to do is when we begin to look at ways that we can work with presbyteries better, we can actually take that to other denominations in the UK and say, this might work really well as well. So it wouldn't just be about how we serve the Church of Scotland better, but how do we serve our church partners better? What do we need to do to improve to up our game?